right. Your Excellency, President Tharman, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for coming here on this sunny day when you could be outside, but we appreciate your presence here in person, as well as those of you joining online. My name is Lana Wong, and I'm a founding member of the Diverse Women Moderators Bureau, Moderate the Panel. So over the next 90 minutes, we'll be discussing financing water security, increasing investments to close the gap between water demand and supply. I think we can all agree water is essential and the lifeblood of our planet. It is critical for our lives and livelihoods, for biodiversity and the environment, for our food and our energy security, and of course, critically, for economic growth and development. And so we all know this, but I actually think my favorite tote bag says it the best. Water is life. So this is self-evident, but yet the water sector faces an ever-widening gap between demand and supply and a chronic investment gap of over $800 billion per year. So how can we close this massive gap, as well as crowd in new sources of finance, expertise, and innovation? Well, thankfully, we have some great and amazing experts here with us today to shed light on how we can really address this critical issue that lies at the heart of the SDG agenda and affects all of us. So we will kick off this session with opening remarks by World Bank's Senior Managing Director, Axel van Trotsenburg. The keynote will be presented jointly by His Excellency Tharman Shanmugaratnam, President of the Republic of Singapore, as well as Professor Mariana Mazzucato of University College London. Both are co-chairs of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, and they'll be presenting the findings from their latest report that is hot off the press. I hope you saw some of the copies on your way into the room, but we are eager to hear the findings, and I also hear that we have some of the commissioners here with us in the room. So if I can ask some of the commissioners to please stand so we can recognize your presence. Great. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us here today. And so after our keynote, we will have a 30-minute panel with Her Excellency Vera de Sousa, Angola's Minister of Finance, Her Excellency Monique Nsanzabaganwa, the African Union Commission's Deputy Chairperson, His Excellency Pavel Isa, the Dominican Republic's Minister of Economic Affairs, Planning and Development, and Junaid Kamal Ahmad, the World Bank's Vice President of MIGA. So we'll have 15 minutes afterwards for Q&A, and so please get your questions ready for this esteemed group. And we'll also close our event with closing remarks from Mohamed Guled, IFC's Vice President of Industries. So without further ado, let's dive in. I'd like to invite, Axel for opening remarks.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Let me first really thank President Tharman, but also Professor Mariana Mazzucato for having shown this leadership for the Global Commission on Economics. And Tharman, I have to say, you're probably the only president in the world who's diving into substance, because he's not only here really leading this commission, but he has also agreed to be the co-chair for the Advisory Council on Jobs that he's co-leading with the former president of Chile, President Bachelet. And so hugely appreciated that you take the time for this important issue, and that you stay focused also on the development issues we're all grappling with. And today's event is really a great event to talk about the financing water security. And water is the foundation of human well-being, economic growth, and environmental sustainability. It supports agriculture, drives industrial production, and sustains livelihood across the globe. Yet today, more than 2.2 billion people lack access to safe drinking water, and 3.5 billion people live without safely managed sanitation. Let's keep that in mind, 3.5 out of 8 billion people on Earth. So it's a hugely negative statistic. These deficits have far-reaching impacts on public health, the environment, food and nutrition security, jobs, and social stability. To meet the scale of this challenge, we must pursue sustainable water security. This means promoting policies and financing that supports water reuse for industrial, agriculture, and even potable uses. We must also decarbonize the water cycle by integrating renewable energy, ensuring safe sanitation, reducing emissions across all water management processes. Climate change is upending everything we thought we knew about water flows. When we experience too much or too little water as we are today, water security becomes essential for both mitigating the effects of climate change and helping societies adapt to its impact. In short, water action is climate action. But current global levels of investment are inadequate to address water sector risks and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The investment needed in water-related infrastructure has been estimated at 6.7 trillion by 2030 and 22.6 trillion by 2050. So just to give you the dimensions, because currently we have a global GDP of maybe $105, $110 trillion. So you see, we will need something in the equivalent of maybe 4 percentage points of GDP in investment, and that's not occurring. So public spending, particularly in developing countries, falls short. On average, only 1.2% of national budgets are allocated to water, compared to about 4% for the transport and energy sectors. Many water service providers, particularly in developing countries, struggle with low creditworthiness, limited their access to commercial borrowing. Strengthening their operational and financial capacity is essential to making them more bankable. We must also improve how public funds are spent. Our analysis shows that up to 28% of water sector budgets remain unspent each year due to inefficiencies. Simply improving budget execution could unlock significant progress and ensure public spending reaches poorest and most vulnerable communities. Public funding alone is not enough, though. We must need to mobilize private investment to close the financing gap. Leveraging innovating financing instruments such as guarantees, bonds, and public-private partnerships can reduce the risk associated with water investments. To that end, the new World Bank Group Unified Guarantee Platform will help increase private sector participation and catalyze investments. We have an objective that by 2030, at least $20 billion are provided in guarantee worldwide. This is almost a tripling of what we did last year. And it would be great if the water sector could take full advantage of this new platform. To succeed, we must therefore harness partnerships, stakeholders' inclusion, and global knowledge to shape local solutions. Country-owned, multi-stakeholder platforms foster collaboration and coordination among governments, civil society, and the private sector, ensuring sustainable water management that reflects local needs and priorities. We are committed to supporting countries on this journey. Our ongoing operations are expected to provide to 156 million people by 2030, over 40% of whom live in sub-Saharan Africa. IDA has delivered access to improved sanitation service to nearly 70 million people and improved water sources for over 170 million people. That is good news. At the same time, let's not forget that there are about 1.5 billion people benefiting from IDA. So these statistics look in absolute terms very encouraging. They fall way short. Therefore, we'll also, let me just make a case for IDA. We are having IDA 21 in the last round. We will have pledging in December. And we need a good round to make this necessary investment, not only in water, but also in the other sectors. And let me say also, through our new water strategy, we will help countries scale up and speed universal access to water, sanitation and hygiene, and enhance food production and smallholder farmers' livelihoods, while reducing the risk and livelihoods of floods and droughts. So water security is central to our shared future on a livable planet. And over the next 90 minutes, you will hear a lot more. But I would like just to close on this, that this is yet another example where we as an international community are falling short. These are solvable problems, and we will need the political will to do that, be it that you are better execute, that we have the budget of it, that you repurpose subsidies, but also mobilize additional money from private sector to public sector. And so the issue that we have is that you are seeing during these annual meetings that we are discussing about issues, including food security, that are totally solvable. And what we need to do is to mobilize it. So I hope that when we are talking about the financing of water, it is only one aspect. I think we need to really build stronger coalitions that are willing to act, because urgency is now and the time is to act. So I'm happy that we do this report, but this report needs to be discussed, disseminated, and governments will need to take this up to actually translate it in concrete action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Axel, for framing the challenge and the opportunity, and for that passionate call to action. That's why we're all here. And I don't know if you saw those previous slides. I just wanted to highlight briefly, that is the World Bank's new interactive dashboard. If you had the chance to check it out on your way into the room, it's really a great tool for policymakers to really have the data at their hands to really make informed decisions. So please check it out either online or on your way out. It is a precious tool for a pathway forward. So now let me please welcome the co-chairs of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, His Excellency President Tharman and Professor Mazzucato. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first let me commend the World Bank for first the excellent work you're doing and shifting water security to the center of your agenda and the global agenda. And thanks very much for giving us the platform to talk about a few key elements of the report that we've just launched, the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. And we speak on behalf of our fellow commissioners and our fellow co-chairs, Johan Rockstrom and Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Let me start by saying that we now recognize what the water crisis is about. We recognize that we're going to face growing water scarcity. We recognize that we're going to face much more variable patterns of rainfall. That sounds like a technical phrase, but it means more floods, more extreme droughts, and just unpredictable rainfall. So we know the description of the problem. But for too long, water has been regarded as a local problem. Unlike greenhouse gas emissions, when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, everyone knows once it's emitted and it's in the atmosphere, it becomes global, and the consequences are global. We've got to start thinking of water now as global in the same intrinsic way that we think about greenhouse gas emissions as global. It is local in the way it inflicts damage and inflicts costs. It is local in terms of the way water is mismanaged far more in some places than others, but it is global in its implications and the way in which all of us are affected by that accumulation of local mismanagement of water. We are interconnected through water in many more ways than we used to think. It's not just the transboundary rivers and lakes that cross sometimes one boundary, sometimes two country boundaries. It's much more than that. Fundamentally, and in a much larger sense, we are interconnected through the flows of moisture in the atmosphere that travel large distances from Australia and New Zealand to Southeast Asia to Northeast Asia, from South Asia to Northeast Asia, from South America, for the southern part of Latin America to Central America and to the United States. They travel large distances. And when we recognize that, we recognize that what we do in any one location that degrades freshwater resources in the wetlands, the moisture in the soil, the moisture in the forests, we're actually affecting rainfall in our own territories as well as in territories much further away from us. That's the first sense in which we are interconnected in a much deeper sense than just those transboundary rivers and lakes, which are of course important. The second sense, and this comes out of the understanding that science gives us, is that water is now intertwined with climate change itself and the loss of biodiversity. And it's not just a question of water being a victim of climate change, which it is, of course. The more the atmosphere gets heated up, the more the soil dries, and the more that forest cover is lost. But water is also a cause and a driver of the process in what's now a vicious cycle, because the mismanagement of water, the degrading of freshwater resources, the wetlands, the degrading through old agricultural practices of the nutrients and the moisture in the soil, and of course deforestation, is itself accentuating climate change because that prevents carbon sequestration. And it has led to a situation where increasingly carbon sequestration is much less than carbon emission. And in one region after another, we're now finding that the world's largest carbon sinks are now becoming carbon emitters because of that loss of moisture in the soil. So it's now a vicious cycle. And we're now interconnected because of water through climate change and through the loss of biodiversity as well. There's a third sense in which we're interconnected that's very human. And that's, Axel spoke about food security, the growing water scarcity, as well as that extreme variation in rainfall is very seriously threatening future food security. Under any normal projections, the world is going to require about 50 to 70% more food in the next 30 years. That's a reality we can't change. Half of food supply is in areas that are already water stressed and becoming even more water stressed. So we have a real problem on that one fat SDG. But it's not just food security. It flows through virtually all the SDGs. So when you add up the costs it imposes on whole economies, what this report shows is that by 2050, you have, and the assumptions are fairly conservative here. By 2050, you have an 8% drop in world GDP. But in some parts of the world, the low and lower middle income world especially, it's much more than that. It's 10 to 15% drop in world GDP in some of the poorest nations. The cost of doing business as usual is going to be very large and very unequal, and going to exceed significantly the cost of doing something about it. In other words, the cost of acting on the problem is very small compared to the cost of inaction. But I use the word costs with some reluctance when I talk about the cost of action, because it's not actually the costs of action. It's about investing for a return. Much of the solutions that water involves is about investment. It's about investment for return, some decent return, and more importantly, investing for what economists call a social return, which is much more than the return that each project yields. It's about a much broader economic and social return that comes from the preservation of biodiversity, the preservation of natural ecosystems, and from improving the quality of human life. So it's not a cost. It's about now spurring a whole wave of innovations and investments to solve this problem. And it starts with getting the economics right, getting the conventional economics right and pushing the boundaries of conventional economics to recognize that water is not just about short-term supply and demand, it's about long-term costs and benefits, and the long-term benefits of acting now vastly exceed, I would say, most of the other investments that we can think about on the part of the public and private sector. I will talk very briefly now about some of the basic economics that's just not being followed before passing on to Mariana. Pricing and subsidies. We've got to get past what has been a very toxic debate on the pricing of water. Toxic debate because pricing is seen as being unfair to the poor, which it is if it's very badly designed. Unfair to the poor and something that's just done for the sake of water efficiency. You know, I've been in economic policy for many, many years. We have an objective here of being far more efficient in using water, and we have an objective of being far more equitable in the use of water. And when you have two objectives, you need two instruments. You need pricing and subsidies. And today, we are mispricing water, and we are also wrongly applying subsidies. We're spending a fortune on bad subsidies, subsidies that reward excessive use of water, and in fact, very often excessive use of energy at the same time, diesel subsidies to pump groundwater, for instance. And we are using subsidies to reward behavior that will degrade the environment and leads us into that vicious cycle. We've got to price water realistically so we don't reward the largest users, which are typically large industrial users and the largest agricultural companies. And we have to subsidize the poor to ensure that everyone has access to clean water at an affordable rate, and for some of them it'll effectively be free because you've got to subsidize them. And you've got to subsidize the innovations that are going to enable us in each sector of the economy to use water far more productively. It requires innovation, the technologies exist, but it requires what Mariana will talk about, which is a much broader way in which we think about innovation and investment. So I'll stop there and pass on to Mariana.
Thanks, Tharman. You've set this up perfectly, and I want to focus on why it is that we even use this word, global common good. Is this another slogan? Is it old wine in new bottles, or what do we actually mean? And we mean it in a way that we hope will be a thorn in the side of the system, because there's been plenty of water reports, many water commissions. Why haven't we moved at the pace, the ambition that we need, that Tharman was talking about, and of course Axel's own introduction referred to? And we think this is because the economic framing itself has been part of the problem. By looking at something as a global common good, it means that there's an objective that we want to reach, and we need to ask ourselves, what does it actually mean for the structure of finance, for the structure of public-private partnerships, be they good partnerships and not bad partnerships? What does it mean to put collective intelligence and knowledge sharing at the center? What does it mean for the future of data? So by focusing on an objective, which is to keep stable the global hydrological cycle, and a lot of the early chapters are actually about the new science, led very much by Johan Rockstrom's team and Potsdam Institute. What does it mean to really appreciate the systemic, the collective, and the economy-wide action that we need? And we say that for 4 different reasons. Touched on actually by Tharman, but let me just list what the 4 are. That we need a common good approach. 1, because we are interdependent. So deforestation in one part of the world, like in the Amazon, has been proved by the science to be related to the droughts and floods in another part of the world. We have interconnectedness between climate, between biodiversity and water, and that's why we see this report as part of the trilogy, right? Stern did climate change, Dasgupta did biodiversity, we did water, but they are deeply, deeply interconnected, especially, for example, through the green water flows, that as we kill the wetlands and we hurt biodiversity, that transpiration, which is the future rainfall, doesn't happen. Third, it runs through all the SDGs, both the obvious ones, like SDG 6 on WASH, SDG 14 life below the ocean, but also gender parity, for example. One of our commissioners, Yvonne Sawyer, the mayor of Freetown, talks about how in Sierra Leone, lots of the rapes actually happen when women go fetch water that they don't have access to close to their homes. So there's almost no SDG, if you think about it, that doesn't actually involve water. So it's SDG wide. And fourth, it goes through all sectors. Again, think of any sector that doesn't use water. So instead of seeing water as a sector, water is a series of problems that require investment, innovation, and new forms of collaboration between all sectors, whether it's food, whether it's transport, whether it's the future of AI. So the systemic, collective, and economy-wide action that's required to tackle the water crisis is what we focus on. And again, what do we mean by it in terms of the change that we want to see to make sure, again, that it's not old wine in new bottles? So seeing something as a common good requires also going beyond the traditional framing in economics, which sees public action as just fixing some sort of market failure. So we talk about market shaping. How do we shape an economy to deliver on the water-related goals, the water-related problems, turning them from problems into investment opportunities? How do we then shape the market to deliver on that? And in fact, the harmful subsidies that President Tharman, I have a hard time calling him president, I think of him as my brother, or that President Tharman talked about, how do we actually repurpose those subsidies in an active, proactive way to shape the economic system? And of course, it's not just about repurposing subsidies, it's about using the entire portfolio of tools that countries have. Think of procurement. Right, procurement, so government purchasing is often, whether it's a small island state like Barbados or a large country like China, it's often 30% of government budgets. Imagine purchasing and the procurement, the desire for a water, just future in terms of what it actually means for how governments buy everything from school food to how we build our motorways to how we think also of extraction of those raw materials that we need for electrification, right? So SDG 13 on climate requires us to electrify our cities. Well, one of the key materials we need is lithium, and if you look at how lithium today is being extracted, it's a huge problem. So instead of actually, in terms of water, so instead of even seeing lithium itself as a sector, how do we see it as an input towards a mission, and we'll talk about missions in a second, of again stabilizing the hydrological cycle, and so creating a different relationship with that sector, which has to go up the value chain by actually investing in order to become more sustainable and less extractive of water. Second, and I've just kind of mentioned this, but more explicitly, an outcomes orientation. Market shaping means to actually have goals, and we list these 5 different missions. I think you're going to break them down a bit in terms of actual tools, but launching a new revolution in food systems, conserving and restoring natural habitats critical to protecting green water, establishing a circular water economy, enabling a clean energy and AI-rich era with much lower water intensity, and the 5th one, to ensure that no child need die from unsafe water by 2030, because every 80 seconds, a child under the age of 5 dies due to polluted water. So what does it mean to actually turn these problems into missions that require cross-sectoral collaboration and bottom-up experimentation and new forms of solutions to actually have mission accomplished? That doesn't happen, again, just by fixing markets. It means we need to start asking ourselves, for example, what does it mean for the type of finance? It's not about a financial gap, but the structure of finance, patient, long-term committed finance. There's 2.2 trillion in MDBs, the multilateral development banks. There's over 21 trillion in the national development banks, banks like BNDES in Brazil, KfW in Germany. What does it mean also to align these types of instruments, the MDBs, more aligned around these water-related missions, their relationship also in terms of brokering and creating a trusted relationship with the NDBs, which then lend money to the private sector. So this becomes an SDG multiplier, as the Secretary General of the UN talks about, around water intensity. An example of this, by the way, in climate is the only reason we have green steel in Germany is that the public bank put that as a condition for the loan it gave to the steel sector in Germany because of the very clear mission in Germany around the Energiewende. The loan there was conditional that the material content of production across the whole supply chain be lowered. So it wasn't because they went to Davos to talk about purpose or stakeholder value. They had to in order to get the loan. How they did it was up to them. You stifle innovation if you tell everyone what to do, but it was a very clear direction. So imagine that around all those 5 different missions. And lastly, actually 2 things. Third, that really then requires taking seriously the word partnership. I think we're quite lazy, at least in the economics field, with the word public-private partnership. It just sounds good, and any of you who partnered, in your love life, it doesn't always go well, and yet you still call it a partnership. So what is a good partnership? Or thinking of biology. I can see you've got, no, you don't have any love problems, Alex, do you? No. Axel. So ecosystems. Biologists, when they talk about ecosystems, they talk about, is it a symbiotic ecosystem, a mutualistic ecosystem, a parasitic ecosystem, a predator-prey ecosystem? So we want the word just water partnership to become much more rigorous, much more concrete. How can we define a just water partnership versus what? An unjust water partnership. So precisely by thinking about this kind of reciprocity, we call it conditionality, even though that word sometimes brings bad feelings because of the problematic conditionalities of the past that actually limited the investment in the fiscal space that countries had. Conditionality that expands the fiscal space because loans themselves become conditional on actually investing in a particular area, reinvesting profits back into the system. This also reminds us of some of the corporate governance problems. I live in the UK where Thames Water has had huge problems recently, and part of that is also because of its own corporate governance. Lots of money kind of extracted out in terms of dividend payouts. 7 trillion, by the way, globally have been used in dollars just for share buybacks in the last 10 years. How do we think about using this real opportunity for mission orientation, collective investment, also as an era where we want to make sure profits are reinvested back into the system, but with a direction? Again, not top-down telling everyone what to do, but to really use this idea of market shaping, outcomes orientation, common good objective, not just public good correction, as an era where we can really catalyze a massive wave of public and private, and not just public-private, third sector investment, but global investment with justice and equity at the center. So why don't I pass over to you, President, again, to also maybe unpick some of these missions. And we had great roundtables, actually, one of them around innovation, which Usha here helped coordinate, actually talking to people who are innovating in this space. And I think the key question was, how do you innovate differently? It's not just about using innovation, entrepreneurship, but innovation that's different from the past because we haven't actually met the goals.
Thanks very much. So let me take off from there. I don't want to go through each of the 5 missions that are set out in our report. I encourage you to read them. But I will highlight 2 missions which are not talked about very much and need a lot more attention because they're critical. The first is that we are going to have to change our diets all over the world. There are powerful lobbies against it, but it's going to be necessary. One way or another, we're going to have to feed a larger world and feed a more prosperous world in the years to come. Food production is going to have to grow by about 60%, thereabouts. If we carry on with our current mix of diets, particularly the mix of animal-based foods versus plant-based foods, it's simply unsustainable. And the animal-based foods, particularly beef, but also some of the other animal-based foods, are not just far more water-intensive, if you include everything, including the feedstock that has to be produced for animals, but they're also emitting greenhouse gas emissions, very significant contributor. So we're going to have to shift. And the way to do it is not to vilify beef or animal-based foods, whether it's pork or chicken or anything else. It's really to invest in plant-based proteins, invest in alternative proteins, so they become as competitive and together with culinary innovations, also as tasty or tastier, apart from the fact that they're also probably healthier. Some low-income countries are short on animal-based proteins. So we're really talking about the middle income and the wealthier nations of the world, which are consuming the bulk of the beef and animal-based proteins today. There has to be a shift in the next 30 years, and it can be done without reducing individual choice. It can be done by providing affordable and tasty alternatives, But we must make this shift. We absolutely must make this shift. We still need more R&D, including public sector supported R&D in alternative proteins. Plant-based proteins are furthest ahead, coming close to scale, but not yet quite there in terms of cost competitiveness, but they're getting there. But there's a range of other alternative proteins, those created through fermentation, for instance, which require more investment in the R&D and in the commercialization. But I highlight this because it's critical. We're going to have to change our ways of eating and not suffer any loss in the quality of our lives. In fact, it should improve it. Second mission I really want to highlight that's important is we're living in an era that's defined by two inflections: renewable energy and green technology generally, and secondly, AI and the digital revolution. And they're both potentially very water intensive. So we've got to pay a lot of attention within renewable energy to every form of innovation that reduces water use. Cleaning of solar panels without using water, which is today's lazy way. Ensuring that we move to a second generation of biofuels that's not water intensive in its production. Making sure that the cooling towers for nuclear technology also become far less water intensive. All of which involve innovations in technologies that are already there, need to be scaled up and need to become commercially viable. Second, data centers and semiconductors. We have to set standards for energy and water efficiency in data centers and semiconductor production. Some countries are moving ahead, including my own country, Singapore, but it has to eventually become global. We need to set standards, let best practice move ahead, and set standards even higher to match best practice. Every element of the data center technology stack can be far less energy intensive and therefore far more water efficient. It can be done. If you speak to the industry leaders today, they'll tell you it can be done in the next 3 to 5 years. We have to move in that direction. But that too is about viability. We want to maximize the power of semiconductors and AI. We have to maximize renewable energy, but avoid the inadvertent consequences on the global hydrological cycle, which then feed back into climate change and the loss of biodiversity. So I'll stop there, but one final word. The global hydrological cycle is a global common good for the reasons that Mariana and I have given. It therefore has to be managed through multilateral action, not just national action, including multilateral action to support countries in the way they conserve natural ecosystems, support them in being able to reach out to poor and vulnerable communities, and support them in the innovations required in agriculture, in manufacturing, and in every sector of the economy. And the low-income and lower middle-income countries in particular require multilateral finance to help catalyze private finance in ways that Axel was referring to. It's a segment of the larger challenge that the World Bank and all the MDBs face, but honestly it's doable because this earns a decent return. It earns a decent return, quite apart from the fact that the social benefits and broader economic benefits are vastly larger. So we've got to organize ourselves to achieve this. The global common good has to be managed through multilateral action. Thank you.
Thank you, President Tharman and Professor Mariana, for that incredibly rich keynote and for really calling on a reframing of how water is managed and really catalyzing this global collective action with justice and equity at the fore.
By the way, I should just point out that one of the many innovations required is we should stop using cotton tote bags. They're incredibly water intensive. Incredibly water intensive.
But that one has a good message on it, and I've kept it for years. Yeah.
As long as you're reusing it about 3,000 times.
Well, I thank you both for that wonderful kind of distillation of an incredibly rich piece of work. So I encourage everyone to look at this report because it's clearly a very powerful call for collective action. And now, if I can invite our panelists to the stage, we have 30 minutes with a panel where we can discuss more of these issues from the report. as well as getting perspectives from the ground. So please help me welcome Her Excellency Vera de Sousa, the Minister of Finance from Angola. And I might add the first woman to hold that role in Angola. Also, Her Excellency Dr. Monique Nsanzabaganwa, the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. His Excellency Pavel Isa, the Minister of Economic Affairs, Planning and Development of the Dominican Republic. And Junaid Kamal Ahmad, the World Bank Group's MIGA Vice President. Great. All right. Well, there's a lot to dig into after that rich keynote, but I'd love to start with you, Minister Vera. How are you trying to mobilize and engage the private sector? There's been a lot of talk about trying to catalyze private sector investment. And do you have any general advice for countries who are looking to really finance water security through investments that help close the demand and supply gap?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you for the World Bank Group joining us here to discuss such an important matter. Our first step was to the government himself to dedicate more more funds coming from the budget to fix the situation. So since 2020, we increase the budget allocation to projects dedicated to water in 300%. So ourselves are investing to increase the access to clean sources of water to our citizens. On top of that, we are working hard with the support of our multilateral partner in terms of, first of all, looking at our regulatory framework, seeing if that is good enough to attract the interest of the private sector. We already did some reforms, and we keep discussing it with World Bank, with the African Development Bank, to actively see ways of having a regulatory framework that is good enough for the private sector to come. The tariffs is also something to look at, the right pricing. Mr. President mentioned that the subsidy is where to put the money, subsidizing the real poor citizens. So it's something that we are also working at. We already did a partial removal of subsidies, and we need to keep moving to approach the tariffs, the price to the real costs of the utilities. But at the same time, we need to look at the operational efficiency of the utilities, because sometimes the pricing is also not right because the utility is not so much efficient. We are talking about a lot of more employees than is necessary, a lot of commercial losses. So we need to make sure that utilities are well managed while they are totally state-owned and managed for public managers. So looking at the operational efficiency of the utility is something that we are also working at with the technical support of our partners. The structure of warranties and how we can mobilize warranties to cover some risks that the private investors are stressing out to us. In our case, the FX risks and the risk of the utilities to not pay back the revenues is something that we are also studying, addressing with institutions like ATIDI, that they show openness to structure warranties where we can attract private sector. So we are moved. We have two specific transactions that we are negotiating. one in Cabinda with the World Bank, and one in Benguela, is another province of Angola, with a private investor. So we are, with support of the World Bank and with the engagement of that private entity, we hopefully close those deals and use it as a good example for more deals to come, and after that look at Luanda. Luanda is our capital, where we have the most concentrated city in terms of population. So if we manage to do it well at the northern part of the country, Cabinda, and the southern part of the country, Benguela, for sure we will be able to address Luanda challenge as well.
Fantastic. No, that's very promising. Thank you. And if I can move on to Dr. Monique, let's talk about the access gap that is widening in sub-Saharan Africa. Compared to the year 2000, unfortunately, 37 million more people are currently without basic water supply, and 247 million more people are without basic sanitation. So what concrete strategies are really needed to really close this access gap, which, as we know, disproportionately affects the poor?
Oh, you're right, Dana, on the widening gap. In absolute terms, we are talking about a third, at least, of the Africans that lack access to potable water, and more than half lacking access to sanitation. That's really huge in terms of population. And the gap in investment, that is higher than 50 billion a year to close that gap. At the African Union level, we have positioned this issue as a critical issue, as in the vision we have of Agenda 2063, which this year we started the second decade of the same. And our leadership have already taken positions on critical frameworks that are also, we are advocating for our countries to domesticate. I must here congratulate Angola, because they are already really moving fast on the same. What is needed is really, I liked and I learned a lot from from Mr. President and the Professor on this report, is indeed to make sure that we have in place the right policies and regulations that are going to unlock private capital. Because what we have tried in the past and have not yet reached the goals is that we are looking at water just as a social service, which I think cannot be sustainable. This should be actually a very vibrant market, because everyone needs water for several uses they had articulated. So if we stop seeing it as a social service, to really seeing it like as any other good, where you have to figure out and discover the price, and then attract private capital, private investment in it. And when you couple it with the right pricing and subsidizing, then you stop crowding out the investors who would otherwise actually find it interesting to invest in water. I must tell you, back home in Rwanda, Kigali, sometimes when you say Rwanda, Angola, then, I can be taken to there, but I come from Rwanda, Kigali. I know of a social entrepreneur, a young lady for that matter. She is, when she described to me what she's doing in that project of producing water, I was like, really? And she's taking this project to remote areas where the national water utility has not, reached as yet, and she's already making profit as a social entrepreneur. But I know she's struggling to raise funding. Maybe because, you know, people cannot, are still struggling to understand how her project can be viable. But it is viable because everyone needs water. And everyone can pay at the right price if really we did the right things. So policies and regulations are key. Creating pipeline of projects is another one, especially for if we need really to seriously attract private multilateral development banks and so on and so forth. A regional approach is another one, which we needed to see, because most of the issues they mentioned are really global or regional in nature, and we need really to have that perspective come in if we needed to really address this, the economies of scale. Data is an issue. At the African Union, we are putting in place even a system of monitoring investment in water and a scorecard system, so that we can be actually following where interventions are being made. So some of these can help, in my view. But finally, I think really research, investment in research is key. In our continent, we are still far, far, far from where we should be in terms of investment in research. And we are, as we few weeks, you know, the Pact for the Future was launched. And we are talking of also the future of artificial intelligence. At least we have now a strategy in place in terms of artificial intelligence, so that we leapfrog. We stop being lagging behind on some of these issues. But everything really requires investments. And that's what we need to unlock. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Monique. So we'll go from Rwanda and the African Union to the Dominican Republic. Minister Isa, Minister. So I know you, we've been talking about the efficiency as well of the public spending. So can you tell us what your government has been doing to really focus on improving that efficiency, and also how you're incentivizing service providers to not rely on the subsidies that we've also been discussing, and to really be sustainable financially?
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to speak from our own experience of half of an island in the Caribbean, and I am quite impressed by the similarities of the situation in the Dominican Republic and in Angola. I mean, I felt represented by your words. I mean, first, I think that we should just first acknowledge the challenges that we are facing. That was a big leap in the Dominican Republic in 2020, when the government just started speaking about what we are facing: growing water stress because of insufficient supply associated with persistent underinvestment for years, inefficient use, especially in agriculture, with negative implication in productivity at the same time, so related to food security, pollution and degradation of sources, and then now more continuous water shocks associated to climate change. We are in the Caribbean, in the path of hurricanes and tropical storms. So the challenges we acknowledge are multiple. First, we need to accelerate investment to close access gaps in the context of extreme reduced fiscal space. Let me stress that. You need to invest, certainly. And it's quite difficult under the current fiscal circumstances, so you have to open up to innovative alternatives. Second, the challenge is to rationalize and make more efficient use of water, especially in agriculture, and that should help you in terms of food security and productivity yields in agriculture. And third, protect water and water sources from overexploitation of resources and forest and water itself, and from degradation. So what we did was to first acknowledge also that this is not only a responsibility of and a job of the government, and the state, but of whole society and all actors. That's why the government called in 2021 for a pact on water, the government called on all relevant actors, civil society organizations, private sector organizations, the academia, and political parties to agree on national pact on water. And the aim of that pact was signed. Everybody committed to it. The aim was to set the basis for reforming and strengthening the governance of water to ensure three simultaneous objectives. First, sustainability, as water is an ecological resource which needs to be preserved. Second, access, as it is also a human right which needs to be guaranteed for consumption. And third, effectiveness of regulation, as it is an economic resource indispensable to create wealth and also to produce surplus. So and that was sort of the first big objective of the pact, to set the basis for that, and then accelerate investment over a 15-year period. There was an agreement on investment, a plan for hydric infrastructure, irrigation, and water and sanitation services. The discussions took place along 18-month period and finally was signed in August 2023. So the government, meanwhile, was not waiting. We were not waiting for the outcomes of the pact, of the dialogue, but we began increasing public expenditure in services and to expand water infrastructure. For example, between 2021 and 2023, the water investment in water near doubled with respect to the period 2016-2019. It was quite a push, quite a sacrifice in other areas in order to put the resources where we think it was much more important. Second, we put effort in transforming agriculture for a more sustainable use of water. In 2020, the government created a commission to promote nationwide irrigation technology to modernize irrigation and to rationalize the water use in agriculture and increase yields. 60% of the water that is collected, that is produced, is devoted to agriculture, and then 60% of it is just wasted because of all the systems of irrigation. Then enforcements of regulations to protect the water source, that meant much more active interventions to prevent and punish predatory practices against forests and riverbeds. The fourth was strengthening technical capacities from water resource management to service provision in a wide range of areas. And finally, diversifying financing, which means innovating and transforming mechanisms for the participation of the private sector and communities also, please, don't forget that, in investment and management of services. I think that we are still in an early stage of that. The government, and we foresee opportunities in several areas: seawater desalination, potable water provision in selected areas, such as the tourist area, to hotels, and construction and operation of dams. The World Bank has been absolutely critical in the efforts of the Dominican Republic to turn around the situation in water. The strong support to the government of the Dominican Republic in pushing towards a water agenda, particularly the preparation of the water law proposal to rebuild the water governance, and several key projects, including, I should say, results-based projects, which are already demonstrating that it's a very productive and different and innovative tool to get results. And because of that, projects are being executed in a much timely manner. So that kind of projects are also contributing to have a better bank, as the bank likes to say.
Better bang for the buck. Great. That's what we like to hear. Thank you, Minister. Now moving on to you, Junaid. I know you are no stranger to this issue, having been the bank's first senior director for the water global practice. So there's been a lot of focus on private capital. And I know the water sector doesn't seem to have gotten as much private capital in the projects as all of us would have liked. So can you tell us a bit about that World Bank Guarantees platform and how it can fast-track some of this private capital?
I'll try. I'll try. But since you've mentioned all the beautiful countries, you can mention mine, which is Bangladesh, which is deep in water also. You know, the World Bank today, under President Banga, is entering into one of the most amazing transformation that I think an MDB is entering into. How do you go from being a lending institution to becoming a leveraging institution? The idea that we will borrow and on lend versus we will mediate the vast resource of capital out there for development. It goes to the point that we've now recognized the old model of there is development finance and then there's corporate finance. That division no longer exists. What we have is finance broken up according to risks. So if you can deal with sharing of the risk, you can bring that finance into development. And I think that's a real challenge. I represent MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. What is amazing, after 30 years of belonging to the World Bank, I walk over to MIGA and I discover the following. I discover that for every $1 of capital that MIGA puts in, it crowds in $16 of private finance. 1:16. No other MDB has this kind of leverage. But we don't stop there. With that $1 we guarantee, 65 cents we resell to private and reinsurers. So we bring it both for syndicating risk as well as bringing it direct finance. As a result of which, MIGA was created in 1988 with $366 million. We've never gotten a capital increase ever since. IFC has, IBRD has, but not MIGA. That 366 has been converted to almost $80 billion of guarantee, right? Now, all of that money, 1/3 has gone to sub-Saharan Africa. It has gone into energy, it has gone into technology, but not water as much as we want. Now, the question is why? And what I find fascinating about the Commission's report is you're making a point that global hydrology is now coming into the game. But my question is, will global hydrology change the politics of local hydrology, right? Because what I've learned in the years in water is that it's never willingness to pay because the poor pay. It's willingness to charge because middle class does not want to charge. Can you change that politics of middle class willing to charge? If you can, then the guarantee instrument, in combination with what Minister Vera has said, that Minister Vera is saying we're ready to push the institutional reform in Luanda or Cabinda. And we're saying you don't need to push it 100%. Do sufficient and we will bring the guarantee to actually signal to the private market that we, the multilateral, are willing to take that risk of that partial change. So don't push user charges to 100%. Push it to at least cover the operations and maintenance, and we will bring in the. It's this compact that is needed, right? Never get the best to get in the way of what would be good. My sense is that, and the Nobel Prize went to people who talked about institutional change. I've always said, don't fix the pipes, fix the institutions that fix the pipes. So if you can begin as what Minister Vera and our Deputy Chairperson is saying in our small island state version, if you can go a little bit on that institutional change, I think this leveraging bank can make a very big difference. Let me tell you, it's fascinating. Tomorrow we're having a round table in which we're beginning to ask the question, can we create small state asset class? We've been working on middle income asset class that's been bringing in money. We're now beginning to say, hold on, if you take 10 million people as the cutoff of small states, that's about 140 states in the world, right? If you can begin to aggregate some of these states around their asset class, we can bring in money. I believe that water programs of small state asset class can bring in the money with a bit of institutional shift, with a bit of multilateral leveraging and multilateral lending. Because what lending does is what the minister has said, it builds state capability. You bring in state capability, let leveraging bring in the scale of finance, right? And then I think we have a new multilateral system in compact with what I think the Commission is headed towards. But for me, it still remains a big issue. Will the global hydrology allow us to change the local hydrology? That's the name of the game.
Great. Thank you, Junaid. So we're at a crossroads here. I'm looking at the time. I actually have more questions for the panelists, but I did promise you all Q&A. So it's often the most rich part of an event when we get to hear from you. So if I can open the floor to question and answer, but before that, if I could please just recognize Barbara Pompili, who is the President of France's Special Envoy for the One World Summit, for an intervention, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a quick intervention, just to say thank you. Thank you for this report. Thank you for this hard work, which is the basis on which we must build a new global water management. And I think it's very important, and that's why we are committed, and we are so a lot of people here, because in this momentum, we need to build this new Just Water Partnership. And this Just Water Partnership are the way for me to answer to this question asked by those policymakers. How do we do to be more efficient? How do we do to insert water in all our policies? How do we do to attract new money, new investments on a big project, but also in countries where there are few people, but they need to have access to wash. So that's why we organize this One Water Summit, which would be at the service of the implementation of your plan. And my question was, what are the next steps? Because now, for me, the first step we have to do is to get out of our water bubble and to make people understand what challenges we are facing right now. Because we know that in this room, but I'm sure that it is not the case outside of this room. So the first thing we will do during this summit, which will be held in Riyadh on the 3rd of December, is just to raise awareness of the challenges we are facing. The first thing. And the second one is that we have already solutions. It is not a new burden on our shoulders. We have already solutions. So we can showcase some of these solutions and build new ones. And that's why I'm so interested in what we are doing here together with the World Bank, which co-hosts the meeting, to build this new step, and especially on this new Just Water Partnership, because one country who wants to change its water management has to be helped by a board of partners, a board of experts, by sharing of expertise, by data collecting, for example. So it is a very, very interesting adventure, and I'm very happy to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a question. Great. I love that. Minister Isa has a question.
Yes, I think, we are eager to find new inflows of resources to deal with the gaps that we are facing. But I think the single most important barrier for that, it's distrust. How do you deal with the P word? What is the P word? Privatization. And now if you talk about providing licenses and rights and so on, then you get into a political mess. And how do you deal with that? And how do you talk to people and say the challenge is to build state capacities to deal with the private sector and not let the private sector drive you and compromise the public good? So how do you do that? If there is any experience on how to build trust with the public and not stigmatize, that's correct, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Stigmatize.
The participation of the private sector in water projects.
Would you like to? No.
Are we allowed to come back?
Yes, please. Yes,
part
please. This is why we want it interactive. Yes.
Thank you. So, first of all, so interesting. Thank you so much. And definitely some of the next steps are precisely also to do some case studies of where we see good practice and then ask how can we scale it. But just on the point of the institutions and also the very good intervention we just heard from France, I think we need to sometimes also just admit where some of the problems are, which is there's power relationships, there's definitely distrust, but there's a race to the bottom right now. 80% of industrial wastewater is not recycled. That is crazy, given that the water rights are given to Pepsi-Cola or Anheuser-Busch from the state. Okay, so it's not just institutions, it's courage, A. Why not put that into the contract? Again, you don't have to tell everyone what to do, but just that if you want the water right, you're going to have to recycle your industrial wastewater, A. And, you know, if the threat is, well, then we're going to leave and we'll go elsewhere, what's the response? Is it you just give them a taxi ride to the airport and say bye-bye? Or how can we actually use this conversation, this report, to create a new conversation, one that's a race to the top, where we also have standards, norms, and firms actually start almost to want to compete about, you know, those that are actually able to match and create actually competitiveness through this, right? So the green steel example I gave in Germany today is an option. It's soon going to be mandatory, right, because of the global regulations. And it's not just about public or privatization. It's how do we govern a public-private relationship in the public interest? Right? So we know from the past that when areas were privatized, often it was a disaster. Other times when they were nationalized, it was a disaster. But it's the governance structures and the courage to create what I was saying, a symbiotic, just public-private partnership. And just the fact, again, that 80% of industrial wastewater is not recycled, that's a failed negotiation. It's not just a failed institution.
Yes, President
Can I add
Tharman.
just 2 points? First, extending Mariana's point, regulation is a way of benefiting the best players in the private sector. So if you take drinks, for instance, some drinks manufacturers realize that this is an unsustainable game. They're already moving upstream to work with farmers on more sustainable agricultural practices and to invest in nature, in freshwater ecosystems. They know it's coming, that 10, 15 years from now, there are going to be rules. But rather than them wait 10 to 15 years, and we see everything that happens in the degradation of natural ecosystems in the meantime, we've got to start setting regulations so that no one who wants to do the right thing is disadvantaged compared to competitors who do the wrong thing. So regulation is pro-private sector when it comes to good practice. Second point I want to make in relation to Barbara's point, and thank you, Barbara, for that very eloquent statement of support. Water is going to be one of the levers we have to rebuild trust in multilateralism. Trust is at its lowest point than it's been in a half a century, at least. It's in bad shape. But multilateralism isn't dead. Think of Kunming, Montreal, how we managed to get agreement on a bold agreement, on bold proposals, 30% preservation of water systems, of the forests and of biodiversity by 2030. Think of what we did last year under the so-called High Seas Treaty, 30% preservation of marine life in international waters by 2030. Everyone signed up. The US and China signed up. So even amidst the tensions that we see in the world today, water can be a lever to rebuild trust. And one other advantage it has is that people see the benefits of water solutions immediately. When you have a kid dying every 80 seconds or 1,000 kids a day, right, we'll see the benefits immediately in human life, in livelihoods, in farmers seeing improved yields coming out of these new techniques, new crop techniques, new seeds, new ways of ensuring regeneration in agriculture. People will see the benefits, less spikes in food prices. So water is a way of delivering benefits all along the way. It's not just about benefits 50 years from now. We're avoiding huge costs 50 years from now, but the benefits start flowing immediately.
Thank you. Yes, Junaid. Oh. Does someone have a mic? You can just, yeah.
On this issue of trust, water and multilateralism, interesting, there's a mirror image which I've seen over the years. As states localize power, the relation between the state and the citizen increases, you find water solutions coming out from that interface. So it goes back to the governance story, that in some sense, multilateralism and water you've raised, but localization and water is the mirror image of that. It's a very what I discovered after Katerina was that mayor of New Orleans was reaching out to the mayor of Dhaka because saying, you get flooded every year. We got flooded every decade. Now, that's a different conversation between two local governments than the president of the US and the prime minister of Bangladesh would never have that kind of conversation. So this trust issue on the state of the structure of the state matters. The other is, I think it's never a public or a private. It's to what extent, whatever the structure, are you willing to put a value to water? Right? We're willing to put a value to carbon, but we've hesitated to put the value to water. And I've come to the conclusion it's never the poor who will not put a value to water because they pay for that value to the water. It's my class that has to figure out that it now belongs to a global hydrology, that if they don't participate in that, they will now face the problem. And that's what I love about this Commission's report is you've given an angle here that I think we as a multilateral institution need to take it to its limit.
Fantastic. I see a hand here.
Yeah, Christopher Flensburg. I'm coming from the private sector, so I'm a banker, Swedish bank ACB. Have a history inside green finance, so one of the pioneers in green bonds. Thanks a lot for all the hard work and the contribution here. I have a couple of thoughts and also some questions. This is $21.6 trillion, if I heard it right in the beginning. That's a big market. It's a huge opportunity. There need to be spoken about that. That will be reallocated. It's not a question. We have to deal with water, either proactive or reactive. People will wake up to that. So that's one part that need to be stressed. I have a couple of things. So there's a lot of wisdom in the word set. We're talking about case studies, maybe about pilots, not looking at what has been done, but look at what has to be done. We have 3 examples of things that need to be done, and we have solutions. And we have a big coalition of willingness, right? So in banking, I can guarantee you that 98% experience from green, 98% or 99% of bankers want to contribute. But it needs to be in the words because there's 1 or 2% that will be blinded and run with profits. So we need to get into governance protocols in the wording. But why not create some pilots? I mean, we have everything on the table. We know what to do. We have the technologies. We have the knowledge. We don't have the scale. We probably don't have the production facilities and the scale of engineers needed. But we know what to do. Why not create some pilots?
There's another question here before we...
Yeah, Anand Rajgopal, another private finance representative here, but from insurance investor standpoint. I mean, I'm trying to go back to what you said about trust and the ability and the willingness to deliver on these projects as well. So Mr. Junaid Ahmad, I go back to what you were saying, you know, the problem of leveraging and scaling it up further. I think when we look at energy transition stories and various transactions, I think what's worked very well is that there's been sustainability linkage in the loan covenants in the form of, you know, the good behavior gets rewarded in the form of coupon step downs, and any bad behavior or any lack of performance is usually disincentivized through coupon step ups or even, you know, note acceleration and so on and so forth. There's various structural, you know, measures or levers one can actually put in place. Do you see something like that happening in the water security space? I also ask because, I mean, we come from the UK and water and wastewater go hand in hand, and we genuinely have a countrywide problem there. Definitely not emerging markets, despite our best efforts. But I think the question still applies that if water and wastewater are inherently coupled, and it's very difficult to disentangle them, then why not use structural innovation like sustainability linkage and others that MIGA, I'm sure, must be all over, you know, to resolve that deleveraging, to resolve that leveraging problem that you mentioned earlier. So curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Well, actually, in MIGA, what we've done is we've started using pricing to reward investment in climate benefits. So we're able to adjust the pricing that we put in our premium to actually incentivize. And I think the bank group as a whole has begun to invest in different type of instruments that have that positive pricing. May not have the negative pricing, but it has the positive pricing. So that incentive is definitely being played. On the wastewater, this is something Saroj can come in, but this is a very big area that we are now entering in terms of addressing, because the recycling is going to be a major boost to the capacity of access to water. But maybe Saroj can give a more global story of how we're doing it. But yes, in MIGA, we're definitely using the incentive to price in a certain direction. By the way, all our programs across the World Bank Group, the Paris alignment, the movement into climate co-benefits is quantified, and that's what drives our use of proceeds. So that is another incentive that we have embedded. But what we're finding is countries, especially proudly I can say, developing countries like mine, Bangladesh, do not question climate because they're the unfortunate victims of it. They've already started adjusting. They're demanding more of that incentive to actually be able to do it. And I think that there again, the debates at the COP of how much resources will come into multilateralism to support countries that are moving ahead is something that needs to be kept alive.
Great. Thank you. We had one question on this side.
Yes, thank you. I'm Swanee. I am a doctoral researcher at Johns Hopkins SAIS. And speaking about trust, how can we ensure that gender considerations are integrated into water security funding strategies to support the active participation and leadership of women in water governance in developing countries? Thank you.
Great. I might turn to one of our women on the panel here to take that. Who's going to volunteer? Thank you, Minister.
It's a good question. What we start doing with the support of United Nations, UNICEF to be more precise, is to start since 2023 identifying the expenditures with a marker, the one that has impact in terms of gender. If we move with those actions, we will make sure that we have more women being impacted or included in terms of participation of the institution, access to water, access to electricity, microcredit. So we mark those expenditures. Is a way of doing it. We do not have anything specific to water, I will be totally honest. We look at the budget as a whole, and we find way of marking the actions where the positive impact on women we can track and understand how far or how close we are from our goals related to this. It is a way of approaching the issue that you've mentioned.
Great. Any response from Dominican Republic or?
When you prioritize expanding the services, water and sanitation services, you are providing particular support for women because they are the ones who carry water. They and the children are the ones who carry water in underserved areas. So it's essential to put a lot of effort into the provision of water and sanitation services. That doesn't mean not to look at the whole chain and the whole basin, certainly, but that it's a particular sensitive issues for women, we think, and that's why most of the investments is being put into water and sanitation. At least in this first stage, I think that later on within the plan, they're going to be more money put into dams and water production, so to speak.
Great. Oh, another hand here.
Hi, I'm Luisa Galveo. I'm WaterAid's new Senior Advocacy Advisor on IFIs. Thank you so much for holding this event. Sorry, should I start again? Hi, I'm Luisa Galveo. I'm WaterAid's new Senior Advocacy Advisor on IFIs, and thank you so much for this event. WaterAid enthusiastically welcomed the Commission's report, so thank you so much. My question has to do with Professor Mazzucato's proposal of the creation of just water partnerships, which we are very excited about. And my question is directed to Ministers de Sousa and Contreras. To you, what would just water partnerships look like, if you have any initial thoughts to share? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. Just to say that we need to give ourselves a strong legal framework first in order to deal with public-private partnership, but not only public-private, but also public-social partnerships. We should open the number of actors that could get involved with the state in solving this collective problem. The other issues is the one that I just mentioned, is the issue of trust, which is certainly linked to the legal framework. How the government build productive relationship, transparent to everyone, and change the narrative that the relationship between the private sector and the state is a winning relationship for the private sector and a losing relationship for the state and for the collective and for the people. And that's, I think, that's for us is the key to building a very productive relationship. Otherwise, if you don't get successes, it's going to be very difficult to scale up all the initiatives and to bring more money and you need social support for that, political support. Otherwise, you're going to be all the time against the corner, you see, because of the criticisms and the distrust.
Do you want to have a final word before we go to the closing? Yeah.
We have two pilots, as I mentioned, about pilots. We have one at Cabinda and one in Benguela. We at Cabinda, we are working with the technical support of the World Bank, and in Benguela, we already have a private investor committed to do it. The issue is the pricing. So how far that we can go, the maintenance operations, covering the inefficiency of the utilities, that's the issue. Because what we are saying, you will step down and that function will be performed entirely by a private entity. We have consequences of this, a different model, or the utilities state-owned, and it's only a private investor managing it, and it's a different approach. So the pricing is something that we are discussing, and how far we can go with the political and social implications of that. So that is music for my ears, listen from VP Junaid, that institutions like MIGA can help us to go further enough and cover the difference with a warranty to give to the private sector the incentives to move. So the deal is on top of our table, and as I mentioned, if we manage to close those two, we can tackle the biggest one, that is Luanda. But I will be also, again, totally honest, is where the inefficiencies are bigger, and the commercial losses are biggest as well.
Let me tell you something. Currently pricing, Dominican Republic pricing is against the poor. Because the amount of money that the poor is spending in getting water out of out of the system, trucks and bottle, big jars of bottle. It's amazing. I think that the last household survey revealed that pocket expenditure from the household from the first quintile spend 3 times as much with respect to their own budget and their own total expenditure, household expenditure, than the last quintile. So if you change that and you provide results to the poor, so resistance will decline. You're going to have results, and then you're going to have more incentives for investments to come, for resources to come. Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with VP Junaid when he said that the resistance will not come from the poor. It will come from the middle class. Yeah. That's the one that will make noise. The social media, they will press the lobby of this, lobby of that. That part of the society is the tricky one. And that's one that we need to manage and bring to us and somehow to implement the reform.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we're This is why it's so engaging to have these distinguished panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Did you want a last? And so if I can please ask our panelists to take a bow, and thank you for that rich discussion. I'm sure we can continue it afterwards. We have closing remarks from Vice President of Industries from IFC, Mr. Mohamed Guled.
Good afternoon, and I know it's late in the day, so I won't be long, but I just want to acknowledge what an amazing presentation, but also discussion we have had this afternoon. Super enriching. So as we bring today's event to close, I want to extend a special thanks to keynote speakers, President Tharman, Professor Mazzucato, for presenting the much anticipated Global Commission of Economics of Water report. I would also like to extend sincere thanks to our esteemed panelists for the insightful discussion on how we can secure our water future. We've had clear strategies and lessons from steps governments can take to boost efficiency in public spending, from unlocking private sector finance, innovation, and efficiencies in optimizing the use of subsidies, and promoting resilient and sustainable irrigation. These are critical pathways, and we must pursue them. We stand at a pivotal moment for the future of water. The launch of the Commission's report marks not just the release of the report, but the beginning of a global water movement. Water fuels development, sustains ecosystems, and it is time that we value it properly. As President Tharman said, we need to stop mispricing water and apply subsidies optimally. It is not a trade-off. It's not one or the other, but it's how you combine the two that gives you better results. As the report suggests, the World Bank Group and other development partners need to play catalytic roles, both in direct investments and, more importantly, in mobilizing private capital. We stand ready to do with our full range of financial products, in particular using new platforms such as the World Bank Group Unified Guarantee Platform, which Junaid has referred to. We're also in advanced stage of implementing the integrated World Bank Group Global Challenge Water Program. Through this program, we will adopt strategic multi-year engagements with our client countries and partners, optimizing public and private sector approaches. And we will not work in isolation, and this is very, very important. Stronger partnerships are essential across the public and private sectors among international development institutions, local communities, as well as global networks. Only by working together can we achieve a water-secure future that we envision. I thank you very much again, and have a good evening.